Warning, this podcast contains discussions of smoking, tobacco and psychoactive drugs.
There were three ravens sat on a tree. Down a down, hey, down a down. They were as black as they might be with a down. One of them said to his mate, "Where shall we our breakfast take? With a down, dairy, 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 down, down."
Welcome to Dying Arts, a bonus series of the Three Ravens podcast, all about heritage crafts and forgotten arts. In this episode, we'll be inhaling a brief history of smoking, traditional clay pipe making techniques, pipes in folklore, and which fictional character was responsible for popularising pipe smoking. I'm Eleanor Conlon, and I'm sitting in my armchair, puffing thoughtfully on a briarwood pipe, while my co-host Martin Vaux properly packs his pipe bowl using the traditional three-layer method.
Eleanor, we'll be turning into hobbits if we keep smoking pipes at this rate. Hello, and welcome to our first Dying Arts episode of Series 4, hot on the heels of new Magic and Medicine and Bestiary episodes, and ahead of a brand new Something Wicked next week.
We are so thrilled to be back with our regular county adventures on Mondays, and we've also got our brand new Local Legends releases, where we interview an expert about their work and the folklore of their home county.
We've also got lots of other things going on over on our Patreon, including a brand new newsletter packed with the month's folk customs, a magic spell, tarot spread and recommendations, all of our episodes completely ad-free, and Patreon exclusives like the Three Ravens Film Club and our brand new episode about romantic folklore. You can find out more and subscribe for just $3 a month or $6 a month at patreon.com/Three Ravens Podcast.
So if anybody follows the UK news, there's recently been some controversy about proposed restrictions on the sale of tobacco products. The new law means that the legal age for tobacco sales will increase each year. So people born in or after 2009 will never be able to legally buy cigarettes. This is in an attempt to improve public health and create what's being branded as the smoke-free generation.
Which, on the whole, I think is a really good thing. Like, tobacco has killed an enormous number of people over time. But I also wonder how it's going to be enforced. Because if you look in, say, 50 years' time, how are you going to be able to tell the difference between one adult and another adult who are just a year apart? Do you know what I mean?
So a 90-year-old won't be able to buy cigarettes, but a 91-year-old will.
Yeah, exactly. So, eventually that's going to get really messy, I think. But in principle, obviously, a really good thing. Like, the harm smoking does to individuals and to people around those individuals who smoke is kind of uncategorical. It's pretty terrible.
Now, whether you agree that this is a good idea or not, it did get me thinking about the history of smoking. When I saw that pipe making, particularly clay and wooden pipe making, was in the critically endangered section of the Radcliffe list of endangered crafts, I thought it was high time for an episode.
And I'm not surprised that clay and wooden pipe making is endangered. You don't even really see people around these days recreationally smoking a pipe, do you?
Well, in this country, at least, you don't see much recreational smoking since the ban in public spaces like pubs and train stations. I do remember seeing pipe smokers in my childhood, but I certainly don't have any in my immediate bubble now.
As ever, listeners, if you smoke a pipe or have had any experiences with them, especially clay or wooden pipes, we'd love to hear from you. So get in touch by emailing threeravenspodcast@gmail.com or on our various social media, facebook.com/Three Ravens Podcast, Instagram @Three Ravens Podcast, and X @Three Ravens Pod.
The author William Makepeace Thackeray wrote of pipe smoking that it draws wisdom from the lips of the philosopher and shuts up the mouth of the foolish. It generates a style of conversation, contemplative, thoughtful, benevolent, and unaffected.
Well, pipe smoking does always seem to be associated with calm contemplation, doesn't it? Like, quite often when you see older characters in books and films who have some wisdom to impart, they are given a pipe to smoke.
Perhaps because it's quite a lengthy process.
Yeah.
Like, you might pop outside for a quick cigarette, but nobody's popping anywhere to quickly smoke an entire pipe. It's like the slow living equivalent of tobacco consumption.
Well, of course, I always think about Gandalf from The Lord of the Rings, as portrayed by Ian McKellen in the film trilogy, smoking a clay pipe with an incredibly long stem. And that character epitomizes age and wisdom.
Well, J.R.R. Tolkien was a very keen pipe smoker himself and wrote that he was happy whenever he woke up in the morning because he could look forward to another day of smoking his pipe. And in the books, the Lord of the Rings books, the hobbits are consistently written smoking pipes.
Yeah.
They call tobacco pipe weed, and it's described as being an art for hobbits, the art of smoking pipes.
Well, those particularly long pipes often appear in the fantasy genre. It's a historical design of pipe, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And smoking in its various forms is a very ancient practice. There's evidence that tobacco was smoked as early as 5000 BC in the Americas.
Whoa.
And it's likely that hallucinogenic drugs were also smoked or their fumes inhaled, probably in connection with religious ceremonies. Incense and other herbs, including cannabis seeds, coriander seeds, opium, and others, might also have been burned as part of rituals, divination, or spiritual enlightenment.
So the idea of using incense in a church, I'm thinking of Orthodox and Catholic Christianity specifically, actually might come from ancient civilizations.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
So it's likely that the Babylonians, the Indians, and Chinese peoples burned incense as part of religious rituals. Although it's not direct inhalation, it is still linked to the practice of smoking, I think.
Yeah.
We also know that various fumes and vapours were supposed to have medicinal effects. So the ancient Assyrians, for example, used cannabis fumes to help ease the symptoms of arthritis, which they referred to as poison of the limbs.
Wow. And of course, medical cannabis is still used today to alleviate symptoms of arthritis, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Cannabis seeds have also been discovered at Scythian burial sites in the Tian Shan Mountains, supplying hard evidence to the Scythian funeral rituals written about by the Greek historian Herodotus.
Really?
We often take what Herodotus has to say with a pinch of salt, but this is quite specific. So I think in this instance, coupled with the actual archaeological evidence that has been found, we can believe him.
Yeah.
So he describes the Scythians constructing small booths out of sticks with wool felt stretched over them, and then they would vaporize cannabis and sometimes coriander seeds on hot stones within the booth.
What, so the Scythians had mastered the art of hotboxing very early?
It seems so. But Herodotus also compares these to similar so-called vapor baths in Greece, which suggests this kind of thing was a widespread cultural practice.
Oh my goodness, the kids today are missing a trick, aren't they? Forget vaping at the bus stop. Why aren't they building Scythian vapor baths?
Honestly, I have no idea, and maybe we've started something now. I'll give you a bit of warning at the beginning. The Aztecs were very into smoking and included it as part of their mythology even. So the Aztec goddess, please excuse my pronunciation here, any Aztec experts, Cihuacotl, had a body made of tobacco.
Whoa.
So her whole body was made of tobacco.
My goodness.
And priests actually wore tobacco gourds as symbols of holiness while performing human sacrifices. Not necessarily even to Cihuacotl. And even now, some people of Mayan ancestry will sacrifice tobacco at New Year.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's meant to be really good luck. And there are also extant pieces of Aztec art showing people smoking pipes recreationally, which was probably just to enjoy tobacco rather than achieve any kind of trance or connect with the spirit world or anything like that.
But that was also a thing, wasn't it? Like religious leaders smoking psychoactive drugs to enter altered states and see visions.
Absolutely. And obviously that is still a thing today with certain kinds of psychoactives. But we have reports from the first European explorers of the Americas of priests essentially smoking themselves to intoxication, which seems to suggest it possibly wasn't just tobacco they were smoking, but maybe if it was in large enough quantities and the strength of it might be a bit different to tobacco today, we're not sure. But however, in early North America, we know that indigenous peoples smoked pipes both for religious and social purposes.
Yeah, doesn't the term peace pipe originate from the indigenous peoples of North America?
Actually, it's a European term.
Is it?
Yeah, peace pipe or calumet de pas in French, meaning the smoking of a ceremonial pipe to seal a peace treaty. That's only one use of such a pipe. They might be used for prayers and religious ceremonies or as a component in a larger ceremony.
Okay.
And each indigenous culture, of which there are many in North America, is likely to have its own name for a ceremonial pipe. And there are examples in museums and private tribal collections which are incredibly beautiful and decorated with feathers and fur and hair, carvings, beads, all sorts of things, while others are very simple. There is no uniform design.
I think there does tend to be an association with pipe smoking and this idea of the peace pipe, though, doesn't there? Like, across culture, we see the pipe as a symbol of inner peace and wisdom, usually being smoked by some wise old wizard or crone who dispenses advice or spiritual knowledge.
Yes, and this belief persists throughout history. Albert Einstein in the 20th century claimed that pipe smoking contributes to a somewhat calm and objective judgment in all human affairs. He may have been being facetious, but I do think that connection of pipe smoking to wisdom has never gone away.
So is it after the exploration and conquest of the Americas that the practice of smoking tobacco comes to Europe?
Yes, recreational smoking became widespread from the 16th century, and it sort of became this new kind of social activity in Europe. And of course, drug use, which was fairly unknown in Europe before.
Yeah.
When tobacco was first brought to England, it quickly became very popular, and clay tobacco pipe making spread across the whole country, especially in areas with access to suitable clay. So much so that in the ensuing centuries, almost every town and village had a clay pipe maker.
That's amazing. And you never see those characters in historical books or films, do you? The village pipe maker.
No, it's really strange because they absolutely would have been a feature of a town's cast of characters well into the 19th century.
So interesting.
From 1700, the taking of snuff also became popular, especially among the upper classes, but pipes were still widely produced and smoked. At this point in history, clay pipes were actually only being made in England, Holland and Germany, on a large scale anyway. But by the 19th century, there were also clay pipe makers in France, where it was quite a big industry, and in America and Canada. However, up until the Industrial Revolution, it's worth bearing in mind that it really was a cottage industry until larger factories were established in cities.
Yeah, surely by the 19th century, we're starting to see wooden pipes as well as clay pipes.
Yes, but they are a relatively new thing compared to clay pipes, which have a much more extensive history. But you're right. In the 19th century, wooden pipe factories were established around London in England. Those styles of pipes tend to be the ones we still see around today.
So it seems as though the pipe-making industry operated consistently throughout several centuries. What happened?
Well, the onset of cigarettes, actually. Wooden pipes had become more popular, as had cigars. And by the First World War, cigarettes had more or less taken over in the world of recreational smoking. The clay pipe market gradually faded away across the 20th century, with only a few traditional makers remaining by the 1960s. This is a real drop-off considering how much a part of towns and villages the clay pipe maker had been.
And I suppose it just got worse since then. Like you said, clay and wooden pipe making, they're now regarded as critically endangered crafts.
Actually, there was a bit of a revival in the 1970s during what's known as the collector's boom.
The collector's boom?
Yeah, it's when people started taking a big interest in collector's items. So these special, exclusive, limited edition commemorative items. And there was an interest in clay pipes as collector's items. It was kind of rekindled. The primary mover in this was a family company called Pollux, which was established in 1879. And Pollux promoted the use of traditional tools in combination with modern techniques to kind of bring the craft into the contemporary world.
Sure.
And they made commemorative clay pipes that were collectible to celebrate things like national events, like coronations, royal weddings,
like
that sort of
mugs
thing.
And plates.
Yeah, but they did clay pipes instead.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the company did have to close down in 1992, but it sold all its pipe moulds and tools to another company called Wilsons of Sharrow. Wilsons of Sharrow do still exist, but they primarily sell snuff these days and don't produce traditional style clay pipes anymore.
Well, I guess there's not that much of a market for them today, really.
No, the primary market's film and TV, and for reenactment and collectors, of course. There are actually only 3 professional clay pipe makers currently working in the UK, with a couple of trainees and some volunteers.
Whoa.
The wooden pipe industry hasn't really fared much better, but there are a few individual artisans who make them either by using components and putting them together and then hand finishing them, or by making all the parts completely by hand.
And how exactly do you make a pipe, Eleanor?
We will be finding out, along with the difference between a billiard and a bent, a churchwarden and a cavalier, and some fun folky facts, right after this.
So, Eleanor, you promised to let me in on the secrets of clay pipe making. Where do we start?
Well, the absolutely traditional technique for making a clay pipe, practiced from the 1580s, is to start with a 2-part mould.
Okay.
In the Tudor period, the moulds would have been made from carved wood, but later they were made of metals like brass, lead, bronze, iron, and so forth.
Yeah.
Moulds became more complex as time went on, but the early ones were just 2 parts. By the 19th century, moulds might have been in 3 or 4 different parts to create more complicated designs of pipes. And they could be very ornate.
Yeah.
You know, once you've carved the mould, you can use it as many times as you like.
If you're going to smoke a pipe, you want it to be a snazzy one, don't you?
You absolutely do. So clay would be rolled and pressed into the mould by hand with a wire along the stem of the pipe to support it and a stopper to form the bowl of the pipe. So it's shaped in the mould and left to dry, and once it's dry, it's gently taken out and fired in a kiln. Pipes might have been glazed, or they might have been varnished, especially along the stem, but they might have been left unglazed as well.
Yeah, it sounds quite simple, but you do see tons and tons of these kind of wrecked and ruined bits of pipe whenever you go to a museum exploring, an old English town or English city.
Yes, you do. And I'll talk a little bit more about why they might have been ruined in a bit.
Interesting.
But this method, which is called the press method, is the most traditional. By the mid-19th century, slip casting has started to be used instead in plaster moulds. So slip casting involves liquid clay rather than solid being poured into a porous mould in layers. They actually use it to make toilets today, slip casting. Yeah, and it allows for a much wider variety of designs.
Well, you mentioned a few intriguing sounding styles of pipe just before the break. Are there lots of different types of pipe?
Yes, there are. Although the ones with the outlandish names came a bit later and are usually the wooden variety. But actually, styles of clay pipes would have varied a lot from town to town. So when archaeologists find them today, they're usually able to tell which town or region they've come from.
What? Yeah, regional traditions in pipes, a bit like corn dolls or something like that.
Yeah, exactly like corn dollies. So the manufacturing methods were more or less the same. We'd be pressing clay into a mould, but the designs were highly localised. For example, the pipe you mentioned earlier, the kind we might think of as the Gandalf pipe, which is the very long-stemmed one. It's called a churchwarden pipe, and that was made specifically in Broseley in Shropshire.
See, I've always wanted one of those.
It's definitely the ultimate pipe, in my view. The making of wooden pipes is a little bit more complex, as they need to be turned on a lathe and hand-abraded to make the finished shape.
Whoa.
Then the drilled stem gets connected, and they smooth the join away before the whole pipe gets polished up to a sheen or even a texture. You can polish it with sort of sandblasting to create a texture.
Yeah.
And wooden pipes were most commonly made from briarwood, but bog oak and strawberry wood are also used, although in the modern world you can find pipes made out of polyresin or horn or even amber if you're very, very fancy.
Well, I've heard the phrase meerschaum pipe a lot in culture. Is that just a pipe style?
No, actually, meerschaum pipes are made from a different material, a mineral called sepiolite, which is sometimes found floating on the sea. Hence the name. Meerschaum means sea foam in German.
No way!
Yeah. So meerschaum pipes started being produced in the 18th century, and the material was highly prized because it's porous and it makes a really great pipe.
Sure.
But they were rarely made in the UK because there's a lack of access to sepiolite. There's just not much here, so it would need to be imported. But the extant ones are very beautiful objects, and those are the ones you often see carved into extremely intricate designs, including often of bearded heads.
Yeah, those are excellent. I think if I was going to be a pipe smoker, I'd want a fancy pipe, you know?
Well, there have been some pretty amazing designs across time. And pipes of the 18th and 19th centuries in particular are very interesting from a social history perspective, because they can feature things like scenes from everyday life or even advertising.
Yeah.
Celebrities like singers and poets might find their way onto a pipe. Plants, monsters, abstract art. The possibilities were pretty endless if you could make a mould.
Well, it sounds very similar to fans, actually, when we did our fan making
Well, yeah,
episode.
absolutely. It's another way to show your personality in your world and
That's
reflect
fun.
the world around you with your accessory.
Okay, so you've mentioned the long one, the church warden pipe, but what are some of the other popular styles?
Well, you've got the billiard, which is quite a straight pipe with an upright bowl, and then there's also an angled version of that called a bent. Then you have more unusual types like the cavalier, which is a complicated pipe made up of several different sections.
Go on.
So a first drilling passes through the shank from one end to the other, and then a second drilling connects the bottom of the bowl with the shank. This is different to most other forms of pipe because the humidity, when you smoke it, accumulates at the bottom of the shank and therefore doesn't stagnate elsewhere in the pipe, which can happen.
Yeah.
Of course, it can sort of get stuck. Basically, the tobacco's humidity is being imprisoned inside this lower drilling, which makes these pipes super easy to clean because you can unscrew the bottom and shove a pipe cleaner up there.
Yeah, sounds very practical.
Another type I really wanted to talk about is the calabash pipe.
I've heard of a calabash.
Well, they're very recognisable. They are the very large pipe with a downward curving stem ending in an upward curve where the bowl sits.
Sure.
They're probably the pipe you think of when you think of a pipe. The reason for this is actually because they became identified with the very famous and totally fictional detective Sherlock Holmes from the stories written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Yeah, Sherlock Holmes has been called Britain's most beloved fictional detective. He's certainly a British cultural icon. And it's impossible, really, to understate the influence of Holmes on the whole crime and mystery genre due to his outstanding powers of deduction, observation and reasoning, as well as a bit of early forensic science. And in addition to loving running around solving mysteries and generally being an all-round boy's own hero, he loved all kinds of drugs, not least a good pipe. But am I right in thinking that Holmes doesn't smoke a particular style of pipe? Rather, it's kind of anything he can get his hands on.
Yeah, Doyle wrote Holmes as a regular smoker of all sorts of things. Pipes, cigars, cigarettes. He also takes snuff and enjoys a bit of recreational cocaine,
Yeah.
sometimes some heroin, a bit of opium. But the pipe, already established as a symbol of intellectual thought, is a device to help Holmes think things through. He has a variety of pipes, including a long-stemmed cherry wood, a briar root pipe, and a black clay pipe, which his companion and friend Dr. Watson describes as his preferred pipe. So Holmes went traditional for the preferred pipe.
Nice.
He calls the black clay pipe a counsellor and the companion of his deepest meditations.
Oh, wow. Okay, so where does the calabash pipe come in? Because the calabash doesn't sound like an English word to me.
Well, it started when theatrical productions of the Holmes stories began to be staged.
No way.
Yeah, so the actor Harry Saintsbury portrayed Holmes with a calabash pipe, as did Basil Rathbone, who very famously played Holmes later on. Although actually, Rathbone only used the calabash in promotional stills rather than in any of the films in which he starred as the detective. He used much smaller half-bend pipes in the production
That's so
because
interesting.
he found it impossible to speak with a calabash in his mouth. And he used these much smaller ones so he could actually play the role while smoking.
Oh, man. I find it fascinating that you have Sherlock Holmes, this character who really epitomizes late Victorian masculinity, an intellectual who knows the value of good male friendships, symbolized by the pipe?
Yeah, and I think the pipe did come to mean this kind of manly camaraderie. Dr. Barnstein, in his 1844 text, The Results and Merits of Tobacco, wrote that nowhere in the world will such a brotherly feeling of confidence be experienced as amongst those who sit together smoking their pipes.
The pipe, the everlasting symbol of the bromance. But have women historically smoked pipes, or is it very much reserved for men and male spaces?
Oh no, women have absolutely smoked pipes.
Yeah, I thought so.
There are a number of famous female pipe smokers across history, including Louis XV's mistress Madame de Pompadour, who was said to have owned over 300 pipes.
Wow, that's almost one for every day of the year.
But you're going to coordinate your pipe with your outfit, haven't you?
Maybe, yeah.
But actually, there are lots of examples in art of women enjoying pipes across the world.
Yeah.
Pipes were high-status fashion objects in Asia, and you often see paintings of Japanese women and geisha with bamboo, ivory or jade pipes, just enjoying smoking as a leisure activity. Of course, by the end of the 17th century, we also have widespread use of the hookah pipe or water pipe across Arab communities and also into India, China, Africa and Southeast Asia. And as water pipes are usually a shared activity, they sometimes have multiple pipes coming out of the central reserve. They're very social, and so they're often pictured in art.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I suppose it's because of the influence of Sherlock Holmes and the association of the pipe with gentlemen's clubs, but I struggle to picture Victorian women with big pipes in their mouths.
I think that is absolutely correct, especially among the upper and middle classes. But prior to that, we know that pipes were smoked by women in Europe. There are a number of Dutch paintings from the 16th and 17th centuries featuring women smoking clay pipes.
Yeah.
But my favourite lady smoker in history has to be Mary Frith, also known as Moll Cutpurse.
Oh, she must have been a thief if she was called Cutpurse.
Yes, she was a bit of a cheeky one. Her life was dramatised in a play by Thomas Middleton and Thomas Dekker called The Roaring Girl, probably with mixed degrees of accuracy about the real life of Mary Frith, but she did famously smoke a pipe, as well as wearing men's clothes and committing various crimes.
Well, she sounds kind of amazing.
She was quite the character. One of the play's settings is actually a tobacco shop, and smoking is constantly referenced throughout the play. On the frontispiece of the print edition, there's a woodcut of Moll Cutpurse smoking a long churchwarden-style clay pipe, which I think shines an interesting lens on how ingrained in everyday culture of the early 17th century smoking was.
Yeah, but am I right in thinking that Shakespeare never references smoking?
You are. Shakespeare never mentions pipes, tobacco, or smoking. He is much more likely to talk about alcohol.
Yeah, see, one wonders if he'd read King James' 1604 Counterblast to Tobacco and decided it was a bad thing.
Yes, James did publish that text, but he subsequently backtracked on it after its impact to tobacco imports from Virginia, when James realised that actually the English economy benefited from taxes on tobacco. The counterblast to tobacco kind of died by the wayside.
Well, that's actually something that has come up time and again during debates around this new law, because, I mean, cigarettes and tobacco are incredibly expensive in this country, not because they're expensive to produce, but because the taxes and duty levied on all tobacco products here is so extortionately high.
And that is nothing new. It was happening in King James I's reign.
Wow.
Now, as this is Three Ravens, and we cannot possibly allow an episode to pass without getting a bit folky, I thought I would do a bit of research into pipe smoking in folklore and see if there were any references in stories or mythology.
Yeah, see, I know that there are definitely witches and storytellers who are referenced as pipe smokers, but I mean, what did you discover?
Well, possibly my favourite snippet is a folktale beginning, which originates from Korea.
Yeah.
So when telling a Korean folktale, the classic tale opening Once Upon a Time would be followed by the phrase, back when tigers used to smoke.
What? Tigers used to smoke?
Yes, or rather, everyone used to smoke.
Okay, yeah.
But the reason for this rather obscure beginning is that tobacco used to be widely used by everyone in Korea across social classes. But from the 14th century onwards, it was banned for everybody except aristocrats in a sumptuary law, which excluded the poor. And tobacco and smoking pipes became a byword for wealth, often being luxury items made with gold and jewels and generally rather fabulous.
That is so interesting. And of course, we used to have sumptuary laws affecting like which colours we could wear in our clothing.
But it never got as far as our pipes.
No, and I have to say, the image of tigers puffing away at pipes is excellent.
It's good, isn't it? I like that idea. Now, as you said earlier, we do have a lot of extant clay pipes today. You and I have seen a great deal of them in museums. They're often discovered by archaeologists, both professional and amateur, like half buried in fields.
Yes.
They were quite cheap and thus semi-disposable. But because there was quite a large number discovered in the 19th century, for example, that gave rise to some folklore about these buried pipes.
Well, that sounds interesting. So what kind of stories were told about them?
Well, people believed that because of their small size, they were actually smoked by fairies, leading to a general belief that fairies like to smoke tobacco. And this superstition is recorded in both England and Wales and referred to by the Reverend Elias Owen, who we've talked about before. He's the 19th century collector of folklore in Wales. He actually calls them fairy pipes.
Oh, that is so delightful. And I love the image of smoking fairies. I think tobacco companies were missing a trick not using fairies in their advertising materials.
I know, right? You'd definitely buy that. Apparently, the belief also exists in Ireland that if you find one of these fairy pipes said to belong to the Cluricones, who are a very mischievous type of fairy, you should break the pipe in half to get the fairies back for their naughty tricks.
Wow.
Which might be why we see so many broken ones in museums.
That's so interesting. And that plays into ideas we talked about before, like the bending of pins to ritually kill them.
Yes, although if I was a fairy, I'm not sure I'd be happy about my pipe being broken. It might incite me to play even more naughty tricks.
Oh, so Eleanor, if I was interested in learning how to make a traditional pipe today, either clay or wooden, where would I begin?
Well, you might struggle a little as the craft isn't super viable in today's world. It is a very niche craft and it's also hard to get hold of tools as most of the traditional ones are in museums. Discouragement from the state on smoking tobacco has also had an effect, of course, especially since smoking indoors in public places became illegal. However, if you wanted to learn more, an excellent starting point is the wonderfully rich resource Pipedia.
Pipedia?
Yes, it is a very thorough wiki devoted to everything pipe, from making to smoking and everything in between. But otherwise, there is the Society for Clay Pipe Research, which has loads of resources and publications. And the thing I think actually sounds really wonderful, if you're in the Shropshire area, you can volunteer at the Broseley Pipeworks. So that's the home of those church warden-style pipes. Broseley Pipeworks is now part of Ironbridge Gorge Museum.
What?
And they will train all their volunteer guides in pipe making so that they can demonstrate it to visitors as part of guided tours.
Amazing.
It is. I visited Ironbridge Gorge Museum as a child and I absolutely loved it, especially their Bliss Hill Victorian town. They have loads of recreations of working Victorian shops and businesses and it is fantastic.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Eleanor. And listener, if you're an inveterate pipe smoker or you've ever hand-carved your very own pipe, we want to hear from you.
Yes, please get in touch with us on social media via facebook.com/3 Ravens Podcast, Instagram at 3 Ravens Podcast, and X at 3 Ravens Pod, or you can email us at 3ravenspodcast@gmail.com.
So which wonderful craft will we be exploring next time?
Next time, we will be dipping our fingers into glove making.
Lovely. Also coming up in the very near future, we have the Cornwall episode of Local Legends with the truly rather legendary Mike O'Connor on Saturday. And next Thursday, we'll be back with the first Something Wicked of the new season.
Oh, I'm really looking forward to the return of Something Wicked. Always find out some very interesting things on that. In the meantime, if exclusive content is what you fancy, please consider becoming a patron for only $3 a month or $6 a month at patreon.com/3 Ravens Podcast. We have lots of fun things, including ad-free episodes, text in-depth versions of the stories, special Patreon exclusive episodes, including today's romantic folklore and the Three Ravens Film Club, and our monthly newsletter with spells, tarot spreads, folk customs, and more.
If you're enjoying the podcast and have time to write us a quick review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, we'd really appreciate it. And if you're a social media raven, come and join us on the Three Ravens podcast group.
We also have a new writing competition open now. After we received so many amazing entries for our folky flash fiction contest, our appetites were whetted to read more of your work. So this time, we're inviting you to submit original ghost stories of up to 3,000 words to be included in this year's Haunting Season Spookstravaganza.
Email them to us at threeravenspodcast@gmail.com, which is also the place to get in touch with us with general thoughts, ideas, if you just want to say hello.
And thank you to those of you who are straight out the gate and have already sent us stories.
Yeah. Until next time, though, while our pipes have smoked off that way, we'll go this way.
And remember, don't whistle till you're out of the woods. Our theme song is the traditional folk ballad Three Ravens, performed by Eleanor Conlon and Ben Harbour. And our logo is by Ollie James Dare.
The Three Ravens podcast is a Rust and Stardust production, produced by me, Martin Vaux. Thanks for listening.
God send every gentleman, such hounds, such hawks, such leman, with a down, derry, 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 down.